Hello and welcome to In Their Own Words, the story of the American experiment in the words of the people who made it happen. I'm your host, Pete Fenzel, and we are delighted that you chose to spend some time with us. I hope you're going to enjoy this episode. It's a story of a love letter of sorts, which gave us a front row seat to the moment of America's birth. The letter was written by John Adams on the evening of July 3rd, 1776, just before the morning of the 4th of July, the first 4th of July. It's a great letter, and it's chock full of insights and passion, and explains a whole lot of how he felt and how others were feeling about the independence of the United States. Had a Declaration of Independence been made 7 months ago, it would have been attended with many great and glorious effects. We might, before this hour, have formed alliances with foreign states. We should have mastered Quebec and been in possession of Canada. And then he goes on to explain why he believes that the Declaration of Independence back in January of 1776 would have resulted in Canada joining the American Rebellion. We did send up 2 armies to Canada. One went up through New York under General Sullivan, and the other one went up through Maine under Colonel Benedict Arnold. Both armies were decimated by smallpox. Adams goes on into his letter to talk about this, and he says all of the causes that he discusses of why people were trying to block the success of this expedition, all of these causes, however, in conjunction, could not have disappointed us if it had not been for a misfortune which could not be foreseen, and perhaps could not have been prevented. I mean the prevalence of the smallpox among our troops. This fatal pestilence completed our destruction. It is a frown of providence upon us, which we ought to lay to heart. This is the reason why we didn't have a Declaration of Independence sooner, apparently. According to John Adams, he thought that this could have happened much sooner. People still had hopes of reconciliation with the king, but the king took it in his own hands to do precisely the wrong thing at every turn. In August of 1775, he declared the colonies in rebellion, and in December of 1775, he signed the next day an act passed by Parliament called the Prohibitory Acts, not to be confused with Prohibition in the 1920s. The Prohibitory Acts basically declared war upon the American colonies, taking away the protection of the king, making us outlaws in effect with no legal protections, and cutting off all trade between the American colonies in Britain and the American colonies in any place else. By doing this, the king removed the possibility of reconciliation with the American people. All of those people who wanted to be loyal subjects of the king, as well as free people protecting their own rights, that was gone. The choice was now either submit abjectly to tyranny and punishment, or declare independence. On June 7th, 1776, Richard Henry Lee of Virginia submitted a resolution, and that resolution read as follows: Resolved, that these united colonies are, and of a right ought to be, free and independent states, that they are absolved from all allegiance to the British Crown, and that all political connection between them and the state of Great Britain is, and ought to be, totally dissolved. The resolution was seconded by John Adams of Massachusetts. A committee of 5 was appointed by the Continental Congress to draw up a Declaration of Independence in the event that the resolution passed. And the 5 men on that committee were Thomas Jefferson of Virginia, Benjamin Franklin of Pennsylvania, John Adams of Massachusetts, Roger Sherman of Connecticut, and Robert Livingston of New York. But the writing of the document went to Jefferson because he was the best pen in the land, in all probability, and he was very, very articulate in political writing. The committee reported out the text of the Declaration on June 28th, and immediately it was placed on the table awaiting the actual vote on the resolution submitted by Virginia. on July 2nd of 1776, New York had no instructions on how to vote, so the New York delegation abstained from voting. The other 12 colonies voted in the affirmative for independence. And so, without any negative votes, the resolution passed. And on July 2, 1776, America chose to become an independent state. Now we had to finalize the language of the Declaration of Independence, which was debated over July 3rd and 4th. And on July 4th, the actual final wording was adopted, and we were able finally to declare to the world that the American states were free and independent and dissolved of any allegiance whatsoever to the British Crown. John Adams, who had fought so hard and so well to get the vote for independence itself on July 2nd, was transported with joy at such an event. And he wrote to Abigail on the 3rd as follows: "The 2nd day of July, 1776, will be the most memorable epoch in the history of America. I am apt to believe that it will be celebrated by succeeding generations as a great anniversary festival. It ought to be commemorated as the Day of Deliverance by solemn acts of devotion to God Almighty. It ought to be solemnized with pomp and parade, with shows, games, sports, guns, bells, bonfires, and illuminations from one end of this continent to the other, from this time forward forevermore." Does that sound familiar? It's the 4th of July, the way we celebrate it today, kind of. And he was saying that the 2nd day of July was the day of celebration because in his mind, that was when the contest was won. That was when we decided that we were going to become independent. But the people, however, they chose the date that we made the declaration of our independence public to the world, that we declared ourselves free people. And so the 4th of July became the great anniversary festival rather than the 2nd of July. Adams goes on to conclude his letter, "You will think me transported with enthusiasm, but I am not. I am well aware of the toil and blood and treasure that it will cost us to maintain this declaration and support and defend these states. Yet through all the gloom, I can see the rays of ravishing light and glory. I can see that the end is more than worth all the means, and that posterity will triumph in that day's transaction, even though we should rue it, which I trust in God we shall not." John Adams was prophetic in how we would come to celebrate the great festival of our independence. He was also prophetic in the struggles, the toil, and the blood we would shed in order to make that independence stick with another 7 years of war. The only thing he wasn't so prophetic about was that he missed it by 2 days. I'm Pete Fenzel. I hope you enjoyed this episode of In Their Own Words. If you liked us, please give us a thumbs up on YouTube, share us, and subscribe to the channel. Thank you for joining us. God bless you.